It means that the United States is potentially prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO, directly from the United States and other European countries. We were in the room, Shannon, as a mediator, and the president, as a mediator, was looking for ways to solve the crisis. He understands that it is for the Ukrainians to decide how they might land swap, how they might make a deal with the Russians on...
In a surprising diplomatic development, Russian President Vladimir Putin has reportedly agreed to a key concession in talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. A U.S. official said on Sunday that during a summit with President Donald Trump, Putin agreed that the United States and his European allies could offer Ukraine a security guarantee similar to NATO's Article 5, the alliance's mutual defense clause. Trump envoy Steve Witkoff, who attended the talks held Friday at a military base in Alaska, called the moment game-changing, adding, "It was the first time we had ever heard the Russians agree to that." Witkoff said the deal could provide Ukraine with NATO-style protection, one of Kiev's long-standing goals, without the country officially joining the alliance. He offered few details on how such a guarantee would work, but the move could represent a significant shift in Putin's stance and a potential path forward in ending the war.
It means that the United States is potentially prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO, directly from the United States and other European countries. That is big. I mean, really big.
Does it mean boots on the ground? What does it mean, but logistically?
I think part of the discussion that we're going to have on Monday throughout the day, because there's going to be breakout sessions there, is exactly the specifics of what the Ukrainians feel that they need. Because remember, as mediators, we were at this summit to advance the Ukrainian position, and we did that, and we did it successfully. Now it's for us to drill down on the granular details of exactly what the Ukrainians need to give them a sense of security in the future, and, by the way, what the Europeans need as well. We were in the room, Shannon, as a mediator, and the president, as a mediator, was looking for ways to solve the crisis. He understands that it is for the Ukrainians to decide how they might land swap, how they might make a deal with the Russians on different territories there. But that's why Zelensky and the Europeans are coming to the White House on Monday to make those decisions themselves.
But are reports accurate or inaccurate that the president does support that ask from Putin?
I think the president supports a peace deal, Shannon. Shannon, a ceasefire, as you know, is a condition precedent, generally speaking, before a peace deal. So in that context, the president has always talked about a ceasefire, until he made a lot of different wins in this meeting and began to realize that we could be talking about a peace deal.
As high-stakes diplomacy continues, top U.S. officials are working to define the shape of possible security guarantees for Ukraine, modeled after NATO's most powerful defense commitment. At the center of the discussion is Article 5, the cornerstone of the 32-member NATO alliance. It declares that an armed attack on one member is considered an attack on all, a collective defense mechanism Ukraine has long sought. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also joined this week's summit, said the focus now is on the contours of any security guarantees for Ukraine. European allies in Ukraine are urging Washington to include such a guarantee in any future peace deal to help prevent future aggression from Moscow. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Rubio explained how that's constructed, what we call it, how it's built, what guarantees are built into it that are enforceable. That's what we'll be talking about over the next few days with our partners. But it remains unclear whether President Trump is fully committed to the idea. Rubio called it a huge concession if it moves forward,
I don't think his mind has changed at all. I think ultimately, if this whole effort doesn't work out, then there's going to have to be additional consequences to Russia. But we're trying to avoid that by reaching a peace agreement. And that's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work. I think there were things that were identified in those talks that we just had a couple days ago that made some progress in some directions. Now, obviously, in order for us to get a peace agreement, Ukraine has to be a part of it. They have to be included. They have to be involved. That's why the president called them on the phone immediately after we got on the airplane. Within an hour, he talked to them for long periods of time. That's why President Zelensky will be traveling to Washington tomorrow, along with several European leaders as well, to continue to work on this. We made progress in the sense that we identified potential areas of agreement, but there remain some big areas of disagreement. So we're still a long ways off. I mean, we're not at the precipice of a peace agreement. We're not at the edge of one, but I do think progress was made towards one.
The president went into that meeting saying,
You're not going to reach a ceasefire or a peace agreement in a meeting in which only one side is represented. That's why it's important to bring both leaders together, and that's the goal here. The president has said what he'd like to see at some point is we make enough progress so both leaders, Zelensky and Putin, can meet somewhere and finalize this. The only way to finalize a peace agreement is you have to have both sides agree to it and both sides of it involved. How many times have we heard from the Ukrainians and from others, there is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine? Well, Ukraine wasn't at the meeting, but this was a very important meeting. Now, ultimately, if there isn't a peace agreement, if there isn't an end to this war, the president's been clear there are going to be consequences, but we're trying to avoid that. And the way we're trying to avoid those consequences is with an even better consequence, which is peace, the end of hostilities. That's the aim. That's the goal here. And the president, he deserves a lot of credit. This is not our, look, when he says this, it's true. The United States is not at war. This is not our war. Ultimately, what daily life in America looks like will not be materially altered one way or another about what happens in Ukraine. We have dedicated time and energy to this because this president has made it a priority of his administration to promote peace and end or prevent wars. He's made that a priority. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for the amount of time and energy that we have invested in something like this. And he's the only one in the world that could do it. Okay, none of these other leaders in Europe could get Putin to a meeting to talk seriously about any of this. So this is going to be difficult. It's been going on for 3.5 years. You have two very entrenched sides, and we're going to have to continue to work and chip away at it. I think we made some real progress. You talked about not knowing what was discussed. These peace deals, these peace agreements and negotiations, they don't work when they're conducted in the media, either through leaks or through lies. And usually they're both the same thing, lying leaks. Okay, they don't work if you do it that way. And they don't work if you go out and say aggressive and abrasive things about one side or the other, because then they just walk away.
have any
I wouldn't name them on your program.
Have any concessions
I wouldn't name
been
them
asked?
on your program. Why would I do that? You can't have a peace agreement unless both sides give and get. You can't have a peace agreement unless both sides make concessions. That's a fact. That's true in virtually any negotiation. If not, it's just called surrender. And neither side is going to surrender. So both sides are going to have to make concessions. So of course concessions were asked. But what utility would there be of me going on a program and tell you we've wagged our finger at Putin and told him you must do this and you must do that? It's only going to make it harder and less likely that they're going to agree to these things. So these negotiations, as much as everyone would love it to be a live pay-per-view event, these discussions only work best when they are conducted privately in serious negotiations in which people who have to go back and respond to constituencies, because even totalitarian governments have constituencies they have to respond to, people have to go back and defend these agreements that they make, and so and figure out a way to explain them to people. So we need to create space for concessions to be made, but of course concessions were asked. Putin has given repeated speeches now for 2.5 years. There's one they always cite, which talks about taking most of Ukraine and his view of history and how, so forth and so on. The second thing the president, so we know what their side is demanding, and we obviously know the Ukrainians are not in agreement with any of that. The second point I would make is the president has said repeatedly, when it comes to territories and territorial claims, that's ultimately something Ukraine will have to decide. It's their territory. It's their country. Ultimately, what they're willing to live with is what they'll have to decide on. Maybe the answer is they're not willing to live with any of this. We don't know, but that's what we need to explore. In the meantime, the one thing we do know that Ukraine has said repeatedly and publicly talked about is security guarantees. They need to be able to enter into security guarantees that ensure that this is never going to happen again, that they're not going to get reinvaded in 2.5 or 3 years or 4 years or whenever it may be. They don't want to be back here again. They want to be able to go on to rebuild their country and live their lives. That's a very reasonable request. That's something we're working on, and that's something the Russian side has to understand, obviously. obviously, is that as a sovereign country, Ukraine has a right, like every sovereign country, to enter into security alliances and agreements with other countries. So these are some of the things that we'll be discussing.